Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball. We got an exciting topic today. We're going through MLB reunions. We're going to go way too early trade deadline talk, but we want to look at some star players that could be on the move and some destinations that would bring people home. You'd have the coming home montage on Twitter with the song behind it and see how they would end up faring down the stretch and maybe make baseball a little more exciting in the second half. Before we get to that, Patrick, how's everything been going for you covering the Rockies lately?
Same old, same old. Look, a team comes to town that's playing awful, and all of a sudden they look like world beaters. The Giants were 1-6 on their 3-city road trip. They got swept in Philadelphia, had lost 29-11. Well, by the second inning of game 2, 11 innings into their stay in Denver, they'd already scored 11 runs. So Giants are doing great. Rockies are still figuring some things out.
Yeah, I liked your piece today that we posted on Kyle Harrison. Some comments from that. Great start for him in Coors. I mean, you could say, hey, it's just facing off against this Rockies team that'll do that for you, but still pretty impressive for a rookie to go 7 in that ballpark.
Yeah, him and then Jared Jones did it. Rockies saw the major league debut of Shota Imanaga. So I'm not going to say it's been bad luck, but look, we've kind of discussed it a little bit in the press box last night. And this is probably going to be the year for the first time in a while that the Rockies get no hit. It definitely seems like the writing is on the wall, maybe from one of these young guys. Maybe it's second time around Jordan Hicks. Who's looked okay so far on Wednesday night. But nevertheless, this is kind of the confluence of events that says, you know what, they're a little bit overdue probably. Only 3 times they've been no hit,
Did you
which
see
might be
that?
a surprise.
Yeah. Did you see the Greg Amsinger no hitter alert before Yamamoto
Speaking of,
threw a pitch? Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's, you know what, there's been a couple times where I've gotten cheekier and cheekier as I've gotten older, where I'm like, let me throw a little jinx out there and see what happens, and then you can have some fun with it. And so, yeah, that happened last Monday, where, hey, Rockies have played great in this game. They're up 5-0. They might take the series from the Marlins. Things are going great, and it's an all-time blown loss. They lose in 11 innings. That tweet did not age very well. But you know
No.
what? That makes for kind of, more interesting content. So I'm okay with it.
Absolutely. And you just spoke about the Marlins, and I was talking about Yamamoto, and it was Jazz Chisholm that hit that home run on the first pitch that he saw. So that'll lead in to our topic today, MLB reunions. And I'm going to save the best one. I don't know for last, but I'll save it for a little bit. If you saw the thumbnail on YouTube, you know where we'll eventually get to, or if you saw the tweet that we put out. But let's start with Jazz Chisholm. So a lot of people might not remember Jazz Chisholm was once a farmhand for the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Marlins are clearly selling. The white flag has been waved. They're going to move pieces, and Chisholm could be moved. What if Jazz Chisholm gets to play with Zach Gallen, who he was traded for? Horrible trade by them. Not a horrible trade, but not the best trade from the Marlins. I think you'd prefer Zach Gallen over Jazz Chisholm at this point, right? I'm not off base in saying that was a bad trade.
No, absolutely not. It's been one side. I mean, when they first came over, it was, you like the upside of both these guys, but now 2-3 years in, we're still waiting on that upside for Jazz Chisholm. It hasn't been there, whereas Zach Gallen is pitching in the World Series, and we talk about him as an ace because that's what he is.
Yeah, for sure. So you still have Gallen there, headline that rotation. Could Jazz Chisholm end up back in Arizona? It's an interesting fit. They could use a bat in the middle of their lineup. I'm not exactly sure where they'd play him defensively. I don't know if he's bumping Alec Thomas from center. I really don't know, but I just like the idea of Jazz Chisholm bringing some electricity to that lineup in Arizona, and just more from the Marlins side of it, just what it would take to have to kind of take that L. I don't think Peter Bendix really cares about it, but to end up sending it right back to the team that you traded for to get him.
Well, keep in mind, in some of these trades, teams are getting something for nothing. And would it totally shock you if, by a certain series of events, not so much on the field play, but a series of events in which the Marlins end up just cutting ties with Jazz Chisholm? He struggles with kind of meshing with his teammates. He works out on his own. There was that interview during the off season where he's basically saying, yeah, I just kind of, I go out early before anybody shows up, and then I take a nap for 2-3 hours, and he's missing team meetings. So he doesn't really gel very well. So, the Marlins might say, hey, our clubhouse kind of needs a makeover, and it would go a long way to not have Jazz Chisholm here. Well, if the writing is on the wall that they might have to just get rid of him and non-tender him next season, it wouldn't be a total shock. You might as well trade him now. And Mike Hazen, GM of the Diamondbacks, might be able to get creative and say, look, we can give you a little bit something. Maybe it's some international bonus pool money, maybe it's a competitive balance pick, whatever it might be. It might be a win-win situation where Jazz is, kind of sitting on the bench, but increasing his value on a quality team, and the Marlins get to have some spring cleaning, so to speak, in that clubhouse. I could see it happening. I like this one, Ryan.
Yeah, I think the Jazz is going to move. I don't know for sure if the Diamondbacks would be the team. It is kind of hard to find. I know that Just Baseball Show was talking about it today, and they were pointing to Kansas City as a landing spot for him, which makes some sense. Another team that can use a bat. But I think the bottom line here is the Marlins are going to be moving a lot of pieces. And when you look at Josh Bell or Tanner Scott, some of the guys that are going to be free agents, I don't know how much those guys are going to bring in. Jesus Luzardo is probably the prize ticket, but even trying to trade like an Edward Cabrera or a Trevor Rogers, I don't know how much value those guys have, as they haven't established themselves completely as quality MLB starting pitchers. I think Jazz Chisholm, outside of Luzardo, might be their second best trade chip, which might say something about where this fire sale is going to go. But he's got 2 more years of control beyond this, and I could see teams talking themselves into Jazz Chisholm, saying, look, he was bad there. That's a horrible clubhouse to be a part of, bad situation. Let's get him in our environment, winning situation, and we'll get the most out of Jazz Chisholm. And he could be a spark plug. I could see Jazz Chisholm being a guy that really helps the team in the second half.
Yeah, no, I love this concept, especially, when, as you said, he's got 2 more years of team control. And on a guy like him, you might just need to change the scenery, right? Do the Marlins still look at him as a player with a ton of upside, or do they have to just kind of get what they can for him right now? I think AJ Puck is kind of in that similar vein with 2 more years of team control after this season. So you're not trading when the stock is high, but you might be able to identify the fact that the stock is going to get a little bit lower. So, hey, might as well do something now. Teams are having those extra years of club control, might be willing to put a little bit more out there. And again, in the right system, you say, hey, this guy can really excel. And we saw it last year with Tommy Pham in that same Diamondbacks clubhouse. I mean, I was there for it, covering that entire October. And Tommy Pham was great. I actually enjoyed talking with him a ton. He was great to me and great to his teammates. And he really seemed to have fit in a way that I didn't really see in the past in some other clubhouses. So, maybe the Diamondbacks clubhouse is that perfect fit. Torey Lovello does an amazing job of building a community and a family with his players. So I think Jazz going back to the Diamondbacks, that really could be a big win for both sides.
Yeah, it's a young team, and Chisholm kind of falls in the middle of being a little bit older than some of the youngest guys, but also they have some veterans like Jock Peterson that are in there. Jock Peterson, another great clubhouse guy. So I think that would make the Diamondbacks a little bit more fun. Let's move over to another outfielder that could get dealt, a guy that is having a great bounce back season. We talked about him early on this show this year. That is Tyler O'Neill. A lot of people might not know that Tyler O'Neill was drafted by the Seattle Mariners. And he was, I think it was a 3rd overall, if I'm not mistaken. 3rd round pick, 2013, out of Canada, out of high school. Ends up getting traded to the Cardinals for Marco Gonzalez. That was back in 2017. So Tyler O'Neill, could he end up going back to Seattle? I'm sure he wouldn't want to hit there. Let's be honest. In his contract year, he's probably saying, keep me in Boston. But if the Red Sox trying to get some value, you send him over to Seattle, and he could be a really nice piece in that lineup to help an outfield that probably could use someone like him.
Yeah, for sure. I think the place that if Tyler O'Neill had to pick to play outside of Toronto, as you said, a Canadian, a guy whose father was a bodybuilder, right? He was Mr. Canada, right? So a great bodybuilder. We see the physique that Tyler O'Neill, has, and he's picked up from his dad. But also Cincinnati is one of those ballparks too, where on his Baseball Savant page, if you look at the expected home runs by the ballpark, Cincinnati, he would fare incredibly well with. Seattle, kind of a mid-table. I was just reading something earlier today about right-handed hitters in Seattle and Safeco. It's one of the worst combinations
Yeah.
possible. So that's not going to help his value, but that is something that could very much help Seattle as they try to get a little bit more pop, length in an already deep lineup, but a lineup that's really missing a big punch in the middle of it. Ty France hitting more for average than anything after Julio Rodriguez. You got to hope for maybe 30 home runs out of your catcher and Cal Raleigh. Not totally reasonable, but getting back Tyler O'Neill, maybe turning back the clock in that way and say, hey, Barco Gonzalez, we enjoyed having you for a little while, but let's welcome back one of our top draft picks and send you off into free agency with a little postseason experience as well.
Yeah, I think it's a nice fit for the team. Like I said, like we're talking about, Tyler O'Neill's not going to be happy with it. But you look at their outfield situation. You got Julio Rodriguez, you got Luke Raley, who hasn't really done what they were expecting coming from the Rays, and there's Mitch Haniger, who there's always kind of questions about how healthy he's going to be. You add Tyler O'Neill in there, he's going to help you as far as giving you a guy that can go and run down fly balls in the outfield. He's a solid enough defender and give you some pop in the lineup. So I think it's a great fit for Seattle. I know that you mentioned as far as some trade fits before we started and kind of turn this more into reunions that fit in Cincinnati. I do like that a lot. I don't want to just gloss over that because Tyler O'Neill would love it, and I think that would be a perfect spot for both team and player where he could really take that lineup to another level.
Yeah, and being more of a veteran presence, not an old guy, still not 30 yet, but O'Neill in that lineup with all of those young players, that's obviously going to help out in a real major way. Will Benson's been nice for them since they acquired him from Cleveland, but again, O'Neill is a big step ahead. TJ Friedl, he did get an MVP vote back end of the ballot. I think it was a 10th vote. But still, Tyler O'Neill, if you can add that to the middle of your lineup in a division, that's very winnable. Like we've been saying it even before this season started, and a lot of other people have picked up on it. Both Centrals have been very competitive and really quality so far this year. So hey, let's take some of that pressure packed and that congestion in the AL East. Let's bring it to the National League Central, and I think everyone's the better for it.
For sure. No, it's going to be a good race, and I could very well see two, if not even three teams making it out of the Central with the wild cards. I mean, it's a very winnable kind of National League this year. We've talked about there's that top tier. There's the Braves, the Phillies, the Dodgers. If you want to put the Cubs and the Brewers as a tier below it, you can. But I think that they're much closer to the rest of the National League than that top tier. It's really a lot of teams in the middle. And getting a guy like Tyler O'Neill, who's playing for a contract, who's already off to a great start, you put him in that ballpark, he could put up some gaudy numbers. He could put up, a second half where it's like, man, he popped 18 home runs in the last couple months and really boosted his free agent stock, but really helped carry a team into the playoffs. I like that fit more than the reunion, and I'm sure that Tyler O'Neill would prefer to go to Cincy than all the way back up to the Pacific Northwest.
Ellie De La Cruz, Spencer Steer, Tyler O'Neill. That's a formidable 2-3-4 in your lineup there. We know what De La Cruz is doing when he gets on base, causing havoc, and with those guys hitting behind him. I mean, that's a real quality middle of the order.
I think so. Should we get into the headliner?
Oh, I'm ready. I'm so ready. Let's do this.
So this was the genesis of this whole concept. I was looking at the Houston Astros, who, mind you, are losing again to the Yankees as we record here. I think they're about to, they did lose now. They get swept. I got one more. So one more, which would move them. If they lost again, that would move them to 12-25 on the year. They're 12-24 right now. It's crazy. We'll talk about them in a minute when it comes to World Series odds, because the odds have not moved as much as I thought they would, because, man, it's been a rough start for them. People aren't necessarily saying they're not going to make the playoffs. I think there is a chance that this Astros team could be a seller, and could Justin Verlander get moved? And if he was going to get moved, how about joining the Tigers at the end of that rebuild they started when they traded him? And maybe he can help them get into the playoffs for the first time since 2014. How is that for a trade that will make baseball better.
It absolutely would. Him going back to the place where he made his bones pitching in the World Series with the Tigers, and his now Hall of Fame manager, Jim Leland. So I think it would be fantastic. One thing I didn't realize at the time, his now wife, Kate Upton, she was born in Michigan. So,
There you go.
talk about a homecoming, right? Like, I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I think, again, with the Tigers and in a city like Detroit, unless you are from the Midwest, I don't think anyone necessarily hates Detroit. So you go, hey, you know what? Those folks there, it's nice to see them back in the hunt. It's nice to see the Tigers relevant, one of those teams that's been around for a while, but have really fallen on hard times for about a decade. So I think you tie all of those things in together, and I think everyone would really root to see that happening, both for the Tigers end of the things and for the Astros having to wave the white flag and say, is this the end of the Astros? Death to the Astros? A lot of people would be happy about that part.
For sure. I think what's so crazy about this whole situation is, I don't know if Justin Verlander is becoming like a reverse rabbit's foot, but last year we saw it with the Mets, right? He comes over, he gets hurt to start the year. The team gets in a huge hole, can't come out of it, and it ends up being sellers at the deadline. Here it is, back with the Astros for a full season. Hurt to start the year. The team gets off to a horrible start. And like I said, people aren't completely giving up on the Astros, but if you're 10 games under 500 by the deadline, at a certain point, you're going to have to make that decision. And Verlander's contract makes this really complicated because he has a club option that triggers if he gets to 140 innings pitched this year. Now, last year he exceeded that with missing a similar amount of time, so we'll see. But that club option at $35 million becomes very attractive because the Mets are still eating half of it. So $17.5 million, you could say from an Astros perspective, all right, hang on to him. You'll have Verlander. You'll be better next year. You can roll through it. But also, let's say he ends up pulling a hammy in September and he doesn't get there. Well, now that contract is off the table. So trade him while you can for another team. They look at that if you're the Tigers and you say, well, all right, if he gets to 140 innings, we have a potential co-ace with Skubal at $17.5 million. That's not bad for us. So I think he is very attractive at this deadline. And if the Tigers are in the mix, I wouldn't count it out.
Yeah, no, I love it. You hit the nail on the head with where I was going to go next with Skubal from the left side, Verlander, the veteran, from the right. Jack Flaherty's a free agent after this year. He had a 1-year deal. So boom, you plug him in there into the rotation with all those young guys from Reese Olson to Casey Mize. Like, that's absolutely fantastic. That's a perfect situation for, Verlander to pass the torch to those young guys. And I think, again, it's that those narratives are the things that we love about baseball. Guys going back home or going to a place where it really seems to fit, and everyone wants to see that not only happen, but happen and be really positive for the city, for the team, for the player.
For sure. And for the player in particular, he does have a no trade clause. And so I think this is a landing spot that he would look at and like, all right, I don't know how many years I got left. The Tigers, he might win another World Series, but if he just gets the Tigers into the playoffs, that will mean a lot to him. To kind of close your book on your legacy there as a guy that's going to have your jersey retired, you would assume 13 seasons there. And it kind of opens up an interesting Hall of Fame case because right now, what would you think? 13 years in Detroit, a lot of great stats, the Triple Crown, all that, but 2 Cy Youngs and 2 World Series with the Astros. I sort of think that he's an Astro in Cooperstown right now on his plaque. Would a playoff berth, let's just say he has a great final season in Detroit and wins another Cy Young, they're like, could he tip the scales back to Detroit if he ended up over there?
I think he's a Tiger right now.
You think so?
In my estimation, also the way the Hall of Fame does it, the player no longer has the choice. Guys like Wade Boggs kind of ruined that, saying, hey, I got the secret, which is all really alleged, although officially alleged, that he's taking $1 million to go in with a Rays cap on in Cooperstown, right? So you can't pick your own hat. Now, he could go in with just the MLB, but having played with, 2.5 franchises. Not that I'm calling the Mets half of a franchise.
Well, yeah,
but
it's half a season. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can sweep that under the rug. It didn't happen.
Exactly. It did not happen in that way. So I think the Hall of Fame would look at him saying a bulk of his career was there. Sure, a couple more awards and the rings there with Houston is something, but Verlander was already a brand by the time that he ended up leaving Detroit. But yeah, that makes it all the more interesting. Would he, allow for that no trade clause? I think he would want to go. You know why? Max Scherzer just won a ring last year. Now,
Yeah.
yes, he was injured, but he got a ring. You don't think Verlander's going to say, hey, I want the newest ring? Like, you got last year's model. I want this year's model.
Well, who knows? Maybe the Rangers. No, I mean the Astros would make that trade. Yeah, I mean, I wonder like what would the other fit be out there when he's dangled? I would imagine whatever the contenders are. If he saw a destination where he could go and he can have a chance at a World Series. Last year, it was just perfect for him, right? Go back to Houston, great team. This year, it's a little more murky. A couple things that have to, come into play for this to happen is, for one, the Tigers got to hang in the race to be willing to make this type of move. And two, the Astros got to fall completely out of it. But it's the most fun of all these in there, because I can just imagine seeing Verlander step on the mound again in a Tigers jersey and the type of fanfare that would get.
Now, he's from Virginia, Verlander. So Orioles, are they going to – I don't know how
That's
much –
a good one.
I don't know if they have to empty the coffers necessarily, but hey, you want to add him right to your postseason rotation. That's fantastic. That works out perfectly. You can worry about the offseason in the offseason, worry about next year if he's going to be retained, or even even crazier scenario if the Astros are out of it and they're just looking to take the best offer. Hey, you know what? Let me go show some of these young guys on the Washington Nationals how to pitch. He goes there, less likely that he's going to win a ring there. But look, all you're trying to do is get into the postseason, and then it's an entirely new season at that point. So either of those two teams, you could have a fit in a nice story.
The last fit that I've heard some people toss it out there comes back to the Mets. They're already paying half the salary. Come on back. Come back in if the Mets are in the fold. I don't see that one actually coming into play because, for one, who knows if he'd even want to come back? And two, I don't know if the Mets are really going to be emptying the coffers for anybody this year. But Justin Verlander getting traded is not something we would have expected going into the year. But we said that last year, and it happened. So it's something to keep our eyes on at the deadline this year. Who else is going to go in Houston before we move on to other teams? Would they consider dealing, Kyle Tucker, who's a year away from free agency? I don't think so. But if they were trying to, that would mark kind of the end of a dynasty. We're going to have to rebuild around Jose Altuve. Let's really bolster the farm. Other than that, Alex Bregman is obviously the guy that's heading towards free agency, and that'll lead us into our next trade here. But anybody else you see on the Astros?
No, I mean, as far as getting, bringing back a significant return, right? Like that, there's an option on Ryan Presley. You already got Josh Hader locked up for a very long time. So, okay, maybe you can be creative in that way and let go of Ryan Presley. Rafael Montero, he still has $11.5 million coming to him next season. But after that, he's a free agent. So similar conversation with the Marlins, where you're not just looking at trading the guys who are rentals for this year. Teams will pay a little bit more if they know that they're going to have the guy next year too. It gives you two bites at the apple. It's one of the reasons why, the Padres paid as much as they did in the first place to get Soto, so they could have him for 3 runs at the postseason. So I think any number of those guys could end up going on the trade market. Kyle Tucker, not as much. Man, he's one of the most underrated players, I think, in the game right now. 30 home runs on the nose almost every single season. He'll be pricey, but I could see them wanting to retain Tucker and throwing a bag at him than Alex Bregman, who we're already past that point.
For sure. It's funny. One of the topics I was thinking about tonight is who's better, Kyle Tucker or Juan Soto, which is crazy when you say it. But then you kind of look at the numbers this year and you just think about, like, which one would you want to give the contract to? When you think about how much Soto is going to get to what Tucker would get because he's kind of undervalued in the defense that he brings on top of it, I'm not so sure that that's not a better investment in free agency, although that's going to come a year after Juan Soto.
I think there was a prop bet I saw at the beginning of last year, which goes to show you how some people are giving Kyle Tucker respect. It was who hits more home runs, Kyle Tucker or Shohei Ohtani. And Tucker was the favorite. So wow. Maybe they were banking on Ohtani getting injured and needing Tommy John surgery or something crazy like that. Oh, what do you know? That actually did end up happening. But Ohtani, I think, still ended up hitting more home runs.
Yeah, and he's proven you can hit with Tommy John surgery just fine. Let's move to the other Astro on our list today, and that is Alex Bregman. Good chance that he gets dealt to. I think that's probably the most likely outcome if the Astros fall out of it. You trade Verlander, you trade Bregman, and you can get a lot back for those two guys as kind of premier rentals. Verlander, the potential of the +1 on that. And you can get some pieces while still having a core together for 2025. Bregman, you put this one out there, and I was like, how is this? How are we going to make this a reunion? But it is reuniting with a draft classmate. Dansby Swanson went 1, Bregman went 2 in 2015. Now they can play on the same side of the infield in Chicago. And that's a really great fit because why not just extend him or sign him in free agency too and keep that infield together?
That could be great. I mean, look, Matt Chapman was the guy that it seemed like maybe the Cubs were going to go after. Still kind of looking to fill that void at third base. Christopher Morel has still done a solid job. But yeah, I don't know that we've ever had number 1 and number 2 in the same draft class ever be teammates. Maybe it's happened once or twice. Guys who weren't of that same caliber as a Swanson and Bregman, even after being selected 1 and 2. But yeah, having those guys together, top 2 guys from that 2015 draft class, 2 players that were a part of those tanking franchises in many ways. Though Swanson, when he was drafted, it was actually by the Arizona Diamondbacks. People talk about forgetting where players originally came from. Tony La Russa, Dave Stewart going, hey, I know we'd be giving up the number 1 overall pick, but we could bring in Shelby Miller, folks. So now you're okay with this trade, right? Okay, I thought so. And, it took the Diamondbacks a couple years to kind of rebound after that awful deal. But yeah, Bregman and Swanson, both on the same side of the infield, 1-2 in the 2015 MLB draft. Again, makes for a really fun story.
It does. I mean, Bregman has gotten off to a brutal start this year, but we know he's a lot better than that. And to add him into that lineup, that would be just a great fit. That infield, because he's solid defensively too. So to have Bregman, Swanson, Horner in your infield, that's a move that I think takes a team that is right in the thick of the NL Central and might put them over the top. Granted, Bregman's got to play better, but I love that fit. I think that might be the best pure fit that we have out of all these trades.
This doesn't make sense right now, but again, you're just looking for those links and those connections. Bregman having spent his entire career with Houston, there's no hometown necessarily to go to. Grew up in Albuquerque. I don't think he's getting traded to the Rockies, and then they're demoting him to the Albuquerque Isotopes in AAA. So we can't get that creative. But what if he's reunited with his teammate at LSU, Aaron Nola, in Philadelphia? Where does Bregman play? Again, is someone getting hurt in this kind of scenario? But if you're looking for those kind of connections and, playing with people that they're familiar with, or they've been teammates with, or they've been inextricably linked with for the history of baseball and all time, hey, maybe Alex Bregman to the Phillies, crazier things have happened.
I was trying to figure it out. I was like, okay, can Bo move to first? Okay, they got that Harper guy there, so that's probably not going to happen. Would Harper go back into the outfield for just the second half? Would make them better. Who's DHing? Well, they got Schwarber. So, yeah, it would be tough to fit him into that Phillies lineup. I'm trying to find another just good fit.
I mean, if Bregman goes to second and Stott's going over to shortstop, again, somebody has to get hurt. And then, you touched on it. Harper goes to DH. Look, they've got an outfield full of DHs right now, so they can't clog that spot up right now with both Schwarber and Castellanos. But again, guys get hurt, and Phillies, that's been one of the areas where they've been pretty fortunate, at least offensively, at least with their lineup. Those guys have been healthy all year long.
I'm trying to find some other fits. The Reds, Candelario has not worked out great, but they should get Marte back. That could be a potential one. I don't know, but I think the Cubs really does make the most sense here, and I'd love to see it. It would definitely make them a more exciting team. I think it really would make them the favorites in that division for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, our last one. Kenley Jansen comes on home to the Dodgers. He was actually the one that I most pictured, that video montage and all those big saves that he's had. You could always use relief pitchers at the deadline, and it feels like he's going to get moved. So another big contract coming over to the Dodgers. Is this last year? I think it is. That would be the one thing that I think would hold it up, is if he had another season, but I'm pretty sure it was a 2-year deal. So Jansen going back to the Dodgers, I think it makes a lot of sense.
For sure. And look, they could use that in the ninth inning. I mean, Evan Phillips, no knock on him. He's been fantastic. But anytime that you can maybe take your best reliever and not have to save him for the final 3 outs and say,
Yeah.
no, we're going to save this guy for the most important 3 outs late in the game, whether it's in the seventh or the eighth, that's just going to make your pen all the more better. And Jansen, going back to the club he started out as a catcher in, I
Yeah.
mean, shoot, that's perfect. That's poetic. And I definitely could see that one happening. I think I might like that one the most, more than any of them.
You know what? It might just be, and I was looking, I'm like, all right, well, how's he doing this year? A 1.69 ERA, strikeout per nine, over 11. I mean, he is just ageless. Is Craig Kimbrell doing good as well? These guys, man, they just find a way to produce every year. It's pretty impressive. And they, too, will have some interesting Hall of Fame cases because we know how tough it is to get into Cooperstown as relief pitchers. But, I mean, you get close to 500 saves, and they're both getting there. You got Kimbrell at 425. Jansen at 425. They're tied. So yeah, we'll see. That's the thing with both of them. I feel like they're at a point in their career where they're like, I'm just pitching the ninth inning. I don't care what team. Just give me the ninth inning. I got to get saves because I'm trying to get to Cooperstown.
Yeah, they are the last in a breed. I think even basically the generation before theirs, there weren't really that many of those lockdown closers. It was Francisco Rodriguez, still waiting for him to get in the Hall of Fame. Just before him, it was Billy Wagner, and then you had the Hoffman and Mariano Rivera era. But Wagner still not in the Hall of Fame. Your guy there, Billy Wagner. So closers are by no means kind of a lock anymore to make the Hall of Fame. I mean, people probably be really surprised when they look at the all-time lists of saves and say, how is the guy with the seventh most amount of saves? How have I never even heard of this guy? How have I never heard of John Franco? Like, talk about, throwing shade on the value of a save, but he doesn't even get whispered about as being like this Hall of Famer, right? Because he doesn't have that same resume of being like a lockdown guy. But again, it was still in those early days in the late 80s and all throughout the 90s. So yeah, Kimbrell and Jansen, I think their postseason success is it's going to maybe tip the scales a little bit. Wagner had a lot of that too, but I think Kimbrell and Jansen have had a little bit more than those guys, and they're definitely creating a lot more separation from Aroldis Chapman, a guy who, going back to about 2021, it was those three guys were in lockstep. And I can remember at the All-Star game in Denver talking with Craig Kimbrell about, the Hall of Fame a little bit. And, are you thinking about that? Because guys get to that stage where there might not be Hall of Famers yet. There's a case, but they can add to that case, right? You have to compile a little bit after being dominant. And Kimbrell's in that compiling stage and doing well. So is Jansen, whereas Chapman, not as much. The bloom is off the rose for him, and so it's going to be a lot harder for anyone to make the case that Chapman should be in the Hall of Fame. And that's just talking about his on the field record.
Yeah, the morality clause, he's out. He's been out. It's you mentioned John Franco. At first, when you said that who had the seventh most saves, I'm like, am I gonna know this guy? And then you throw John Franco at me. Yes, I know John Franco. But interesting that Kimbrell and Jansen literally just passed him. And by the end of this year, they should pass K-Rod, and they would be right up against those three guys that are in the Hall of Fame: Mariano Rivera, Trevor Hoffman, and Lee Smith. Was Lee Smith a Veterans Council guy? Or Veterans Committee guy?
Yeah, he was. He did not get in on a ballot because, again, thinking about he jumped around for so many teams. That's another one of those things. I think players will get a little bit of extra credit if they stayed with one team, the entirety of their career. But when you jump around as much as someone like Lee Smith did, he was even a Yankee for a minute. It's sort of like, well, no one really wanted to keep you around that much, and you compiled a lot of this statistic that wasn't really valued as much at the time. And, he was the guy that both Hoffman and Rivera had to pass on the way to the most career saves all time. So, Lee Smith, who was he was a veteran guy. He did have to wait a little while, though.
Yeah, he did, for sure. And I don't think anyone's ever going to touch the 600 saves that Hoffman and Rivera put up, but who knows if anyone's ever going to touch the 500 that these guys might get to. I think they're 36 years old. Do they have 3 more years left? They can average 7 or 25 a year, get those last 75 saves. I'm rooting for them. I always want to see these guys reach their milestones. That's the other thing about Justin Verlander. It's like, I think one of the reasons he was excited to go back to the Astros was getting wins. And unfortunately this year, not getting a lot of wins. I think he needs 42 more to get to 300. So milestones, very important in Hall of Fame cases for sure.
Yeah, and I think we've started to back away from those milestone numbers because the game has just changed so much in the last 20 years as far as what's considered valuable. Now metrics are valuable, so that those kind of traditional stats, whereas RBI really is it's important, right? I mean, you look at the leaders in RBI every year, and you go, oh, all these guys are great. Well, there's guys that are also playing incredibly well. I think it was Jose Altuve didn't have 10 RBI in the entire month of April, and he was the best player in the American League, right? So those stats and the pitcher win, where again you've got to get past that fifth inning, and you got to be fortunate enough to have your bullpen to hold that down, and that's really out of your control. It's kind of why quality starts is a stat that has a lot of value, but we don't talk about the all-time leaders in quality starts, right? That's not necessarily something you're striving for. So in a very short amount of time, we went from 300 being the magic number for pitcher wins to 200, like that. Like in 10 years, it dropped down that low.
I think that's why Verlander wants 300 so bad, because he would probably be the last one. I can't see anyone sniffing it. I mean, it might be 150 one day. We're like, oh, 150 wins, man. What a great career. So yeah, the numbers are definitely changing, and it's good that hopefully voters will adjust to that. And when you get to Hall of Fame cases, like there was an interesting talk about guys like Chase Utley and David Wright this year, as far as just having great peaks, but not reaching the milestones, and are they considered Hall worthy? And both of them did better in the voting than I think I would have expected. So
I would agree with that. I would agree. I don't think their peaks were that elite. I think they were that tier below. You're like, oh no, this is one of the best players of the generation, but not Sandy Koufax like elite, where you say you don't see Sandy Koufax on any leaderboard, and yet he's revered as being one of the greatest pitchers of all time because of how high his peak seasons were. He just didn't have any longevity. Utley and Wright. Utley had a little bit more longevity, but that was as a bench player. That was as a role player, whereas Wright had his career kind of, taken out from underneath him with those back injuries. So I think Wright almost has a way better case than Chase Utley.
And yet the voting, I think Utley got like 30. I don't even get how Utley got. He got like 30 or 40% of the vote. I was stunned. I mean, I thought Wright was going to fall off the ballot, so I was happy to see he got to hang on there for a little bit, so still be discussed. But when I saw that gulf between Utley and Wright, and I mean, this is getting to the point where guys are being voted for the Hall, and I watched their whole careers, and I'm like, in what world was Chase Utley ever a better player than David Wright? And that's obviously people see the Mets flag behind me, and they say, well, that's why he's saying it. But I don't know. I was there in those years. I don't remember Utley being that guy, but hey.
Yeah, I think Utley is an intangible guy, right? Where there's some really strong numbers for him. Again, at second base, a position where you typically don't get that much offense, and so he was providing a lot of different intangibles, a lot of behind the scenes, good clubhouse guy. So like for that, he gets a boost, but overall his numbers didn't reach 2,000 hits, right? So David Wright definitely a much more impactful player, I feel like, but they are very, very similar. If you take a 10,000 foot view with careers that really weren't that long and weren't able to really reach a lot of the typical milestones.
And yet Utley might be in 2 years by the trends. Crazy. Let's get to our last topic of the day. I wanted to look at the World Series odds here, because we just published an article today at justbaseball.com with our updated odds from BetMGM. And in the article, you can see what the odds, what the change in the odds have been. So what we're going to do is we're going to look through here, and we are going to pick our best bet. So the odds we would take, and then also who we think is going to win the World Series at this stage of the season. So currently you have the Dodgers are the favorites, plus 325, Braves at plus 410, Yankees at plus 700, Phillies plus 900, Orioles plus 1100, and then you have the Astros and the Rangers at plus 1500. This is what I was saying. How are the Astros still at plus 1,500? I mean, it's crazy.
It is. I think, again, that a lot of that has to do with their resume, with their pedigree, with the roster that they have, where it's just going to look a lot different than it has in the past. Instead of coasting into September, they're going to be grinding into September. And then again, once you make it to October, it's anyone's race. And if you still have Justin Verlander there, you got a healthy Framber Valdez, a lot of those young guys, maybe Ronel Blanco is still effective. You like the odds of a team like that could win its third World Series here and not very long. So if you're looking at value for something like that, like you said, you're going, I don't know about that. That seems like it could be a reach for a team that's so far back. But again, at the same time, that they've dropped a lot, which means now there's even more value there at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, you grabbed them before the season. That's quick math, like plus 850 or plus 950, something like that. So it is a drop, and I guess that's probably what they'd say. We've already dropped them, 650 odds, but I wouldn't bet on the Astros. So let's start with, who do we think is going to win the World Series of those teams, or if you have someone off the board, who's your pick right now? I think we might end up with the same pick, but I'll let you take the team first.
Again, once you get to the postseason, it's a totally different thing. But if I'm picking based on how good this team is and how good they'll be in the regular season and the dudes that they're going to have in October, and I'm also going to completely forget everything I saw last October, I got to say the Los Angeles Dodgers are still going to be the team to beat in all of Major League Baseball.
Okay, you know what? We have different teams. But it's hard to ignore it. They are the betting favorite. I mean, it
Tell
makes
me
sense.
why you don't like the Dodgers then. So you don't have the Dodgers, and we'll hear who you've got in a second. What do you not like about the Dodgers?
That they choke in October all the time.
That's important. That's kind of important. Can't argue that.
I mean, look, on paper, yes. And I think that the team that I'm going with is the Phillies. I actually think the Phillies are the team that's going to win it all this year. And the reason why I'm picking them is it feels like it's just been building, right? The last 2 years, they've been so close. And the way they've gotten off to such a great start this year, it feels like it's all coming together for them. And it's hard for me to look at any series. If Ranger Suarez is this, and they're going to have Zach Wheeler, Ranger Suarez, and Aaron Nola, we've seen that exact formula get them right on the doorstep. And I think this is the year that they put it all together and they win it all.
When considering all the factors, I also would have said the Philadelphia Phillies. So you did have me read right? Because if you combine the odds plus 9,000, with the team,
or 900.
Yeah, excuse me, plus 900. The Rockies are plus 90,000. No, they're actually plus 100,000. So there's that. But yeah, no, I like, again, the value that you're getting. It's not totally an underdog, but you're right. You see them trending in the right direction. Sure, they didn't get to the World Series in 23 where they were at in 22, but you just look at how well everyone's playing right now. They've gotten in a groove a little bit early. They got the dogs there in the rotation, which I think is going to be the biggest piece. And and this is true, for most of the best teams in baseball, but their general manager, Dave Dombrowski is going to go out and use every tool available to him to improve that roster wherever it is that they need improving.
Absolutely. They're going for it. This is the time. You got Bryce Harper right in his prime. You want to win a World Series with Bryce Harper and with Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola, pitching at the height of their powers. So I think this is the year for the Phillies. Now let's get into which betting odds. So we're going to look a little bit further down the board. So you got the Mariners plus 1,800, the Twins plus 2,000, Cubs and Brewers plus 3,000. Actually, Cubs and Guardians plus 3,000, Brewers, Blue Jays plus 4,000, Diamondbacks, Tigers, Padres, Rays plus 5,000, Reds, Mets, Giants, Cardinals plus 6,600. And then you got the Red Sox and Royals plus 8,000. And we can kind of leave the rest of the teams off here. We don't have to expect any of them to win the World Series. I was already looking at it, so I'll go first, give you some time to really make your pick. Of all of those teams, the one that I like the most at the odds, it's the Mariners at plus 1,800, because right back to pitching, right? I think they have the pitching to do it. I don't getting to the dance is a little more difficult, I think, for Seattle than maybe the Cubs or the Brewers. But I really think that they have the rotation to make a run through October. And we'll see what Jerry Dipoto does at the deadline. Maybe you get Tyler O'Neill, right? Maybe you get a bat. But yeah, I think the Mariners are a good bet at those odds.
I like them. I like right next to them the Rangers. Their odds have fallen a little bit to plus 1,500. Again, knowing your history, like with the Dodgers, you go, well, they always end up crumbling in October, so stay away from that. No team has won back-to-back World Series since the Yankees in 1999 and 2000. So that should take the Rangers out of that conversation. But yet, once they get back an entire starting rotation that's on the IL right now, they are one of those teams where if they can get into the postseason, like we saw last year, they can be obviously very dangerous. Same is still true of the Diamondbacks. I think there's almost like three tiers, right? There's those top 10 teams, and the Mariners and Rangers are kind of in the back end of the top 10 favorites. But it's really that middle tier where it gets fun, where these teams could either not even make the postseason at all, or they get hot like the two wildcard teams from 2023, like the Rangers and the Diamondbacks. And I feel like that middle tier is where it can really get fun.
Well, there were some people last year that got out ahead of the Diamondbacks, threw a little sprinkle on them, and then we're sitting with some crazy odds in the World Series. Like, man, I'm in line to win a lot of money on like a $10 bet because the odds were so long. So, I mean, you can say, you know what, let me throw $10 on the Royals at plus 8,000. And you never know what's going to happen because maybe the Royals are aggressive at the deadline. They get another pitcher. They trade for Justin Verlander. Who knows what happens? Are they going to bat and all of a sudden the Royals can sneak in there and then they can make some noise. So that is a kind of a fun thing to do. You don't want to go crazy and say, hey, let me put some money on the Marlins right now to win the World Series, or just setting that on fire. But a team like the Royals that's been pretty good, that's sitting with kind of crazy odds, I wouldn't say that it's likely they're going to win the World Series, but throw $5 on it. Why not?
Yeah, they're plus 8,000 right now. So again, in that division, it increases the likelihood of them getting into October. The Reds at plus 6,600. That's, somewhat sizable. And, I'm sure there's a lot of Blue Jays fans out there looking at plus 4,000 saying, man, I'm getting a lot of value, especially since it was plus 2,000 at the start of the year. So again, that middle tier is where it can get fun. And even the Rays, like a team that you think as this perennial club that's going to make a run, or at least get to October, they're sitting at plus 5,000 right now after a plus 1,500 dip.
Yeah, I look at the Rays and the Padres right there at the same odds, and I'm like, well, no, the Padres, they've been uber aggressive. Who knows what they're going to be at the deadline if Preller does some more dealing. So, yeah, there's some value to be had a little bit lower down at this time of year where you can just throw a little bit on one of these teams, and they might be completely different come October.
Yeah, that's what makes baseball so much fun, and is you don't know what's going to happen, but you make a lot of guesses, you make a lot of predictions, you host a podcast, you say a lot of things, and you only go back and talk about the ones that you actually got right. That's why,
of course.
That's why you spread it around as much as possible.
Yeah. Volume shooters. Okay. We're not trying to just take a couple threes a game. We're throwing the shots up, and the ones that fall, we'll talk about. The other ones we'll just sweep under the rug, move on to next week, which for us will be Sunday's edition of Who's Better Baseball. We'll be live again. So appreciate all of you who tuned into the stream tonight. Make sure you head over to our YouTube channel, subscribe there as we break up these videos into smaller, more bite-sized options for you to watch individual topics. Check out the podcasts wherever you get, Apple, Spotify. You can find us there for the audio-only version of the show. Head over to our social media at
Who's Better BB.
Who's Better BB?
On the X machine, yes. Yeah, sit down with your mom on Sunday, catch her up with a lot of our predictions, go back and look through a couple of those episodes, and then, watch us live on Sunday, where we should have some mother topics. Like, we know the Yankees are Pedro Martinez's daddy. Well, who's so-and-so's mother? Or who's the biggest mother? You know what I'm saying? I don't know. We'll workshop it.
Yeah, I think we need to spend we need to spend the whole next 3 days trying to workshop that, turn that into a topic. But hey, maybe we'll talk about it. And I'm sure for those of you listening, that's one you're going to want to tune in for. So check us out on Sunday.